Hello, BookTube. Well, it's Poetry Thursday, which is a custom honored in the breach here on this little corner of BookTube. We all love it, but we don't do it, including me. I'm absolutely guilty. We're supposed to, on Thursdays, we're supposed to pull down a poem from our shelves, read it aloud to me, and then talk about it. Not necessarily critically analyze it, but just say what you think about it, what you like about it, how it felt to read it again or to read it for the first time. I would like to see 300 channels do Poetry Thursday. I would like it if poetry had a little bit more room to breathe here on our little corner BookTube. But I figured I might as well pay attention to it while I'm up here in Vermont. Why should Aaron Facer have all the fun, after all? He's our most loyal poetry tuber, I think, in this little corner BookTube. And I love watching Poetry Thursday videos, so I thought I should make one of my own. I'm still up in the old house in Vermont. I still have not returned to Boston. Right now, the tentative plan, I might jinx it by saying it, the tentative plan is that the Bean and I will go back to Boston this weekend. But there is a massive storm that is currently lashing one half of the country, and the models on the path and nature of that storm have been all over the map for the last 2 days. So right now, it looks like that storm will have petered itself out and everything will be drying off and clearing up by the weekend. If that's true, then it will be driving weather. Last weekend, it was not. Last weekend, there was a massive snowstorm in Boston that would have made driving there a misery. And a pointless one, right? A pointless one. Aside from the psychological damage that I'm doing to the Richardson family, my needs and Frida's needs are being perfectly well cared for. Aside, again, from those aforementioned psychological wounds, we are very low-key guests. So we just sit around, and she sits around with me, and I sit around and write and read all day. It's not like I'm knocking on people's doors and wistfully saying, "So, going to Canopy Lake Park, maybe?" I am not a guest who needs to be entertained. Nevertheless, which is not to say they aren't all wanting to see the back of us. Not us, I should say. Frida is a hit here. Me. But anyway, if that happens, then I'll have access to all of my own poetry books for the next Poetry Thursday. But there's no shortage of books here at the old house in Vermont. No shortage at all. There are more of them than you would believe. So I went and found the poetry section, and when I found it, I remembered that Mark Richardson, he's my host right now, the host of the BookTube channel, Richardson Reads. I remember something that he and I have in common. One of the many things that he and I have in common was that we both are big fans of old, what you would consider to be college and high school textbooks, if they're well done. Anthology textbooks can be really well done. And if they are, then the introductions to pieces, the contextualization of pieces, the footnotes on pieces, the arrangement of pieces, it's all going to be really, really good. That's absolutely true. It's a little bit weird to me that someone can go to college, get, for instance, the Norton Anthology of Poetry, use it in college, and then when they're out of college, go looking for a poetry anthology because, it was a school book, it was a textbook of some kind. Nothing could be further from the truth. If you see, for instance, a big Norton Anthology of modern literature or English literature or poetry at a used bookstore, grab it. They're really, really good, but be very careful. Be very careful because Norton anthologies, because they are used in schools very widely, tend to be hugely highlighted, obnoxiously highlighted with those neon colors, hugely so, to the point where they're not usable anymore, to the point where a shop shouldn't be selling them. So you have to watch out for that in a way that applies to Norton anthologies and also Norton critical editions. You just got to watch for highlighting. But I went to Mark's poetry shelves, and I found the Norton Anthology of Poetry. So I thought we'd dig into this for Poetry Thursday, and I went to Robert Herrick. He had a face that only a mother could love, but he was a Anglican divine, and he ran afoul of Cromwell. He ran afoul of that horrible period of discontinuity where the king was arrested and executed. A stupid, power-hungry commoner who had not been anointed by God started to run the state. And then he was seen off, and the son of the dead king was brought back in the Restoration. And during that little gap, a lot of people's fortunes were marred. A lot of people were thrown to the wolves, especially if you had espoused the wrong cause. If you had said, well, of course I'm loyal to my king and my country. If you had said that in any way, and then your king loses, then the guy who supplants him is not going to forget that. He's going to want to take it out on you. But Herrick was eventually restored. After the restoration, he was restored. He got his living back and a measure of peace and comfort back. His last years were not pleasant at all. He lived into his 80s, I think, but his last few years were... To live into your 80s in Herrick's day was not the same as living into your 80s in a well-financed and medically adept country like the United States of America, where you're going to be a lot more comfortable than Herrick was. But Herrick was never actually all that comfortable in his life, even when he wasn't in his 80s. He was never all that comfortable. The thing that we maybe tend to forget about ages like his, the Restoration era, is how brutal they were. There was no healthcare. There was no medicine. So you could live, sure, if you managed to get through the labyrinth of childhood infections, you could live. But you often had complaints and aches and pains and that would last your whole life and plague you your whole life. And Herrick had more than his share of those, which might account for the fact that when he was writing poetry, when he dipped his pen in an inkwell, had a paper in front of him and thought, what do I feel like writing about today? It was usually death. It was usually death. It was usually the shortness of life, the brutality of life. He writes many, many poems about dead children, for instance, and they're lovely. But, you get to the point where you want to say, lighten up, dude. He also is, the most famous thing that he ever wrote is a poem that starts off with, gather ye rosebuds while you may, which is the only line of Herrick that most people know. I could read you a brief, well, it's not the poem that I have in mind, but I'll read you a brief poem of his about a dead child, just to show you that they're not just morbid. This is called Upon a Child. Here a pretty baby lies, sung asleep with lullabies. Pray be silent and do not stir the easy earth that covers her. So you see that in the little poem, you are given a beautiful, idyllic little moment. A baby sleeping, has been lulled to sleep by a lullaby, but it turns out in the last line the baby's dead. But I don't want to do that. I want to read instead something that was a stylistic exercise of his. He often did this. He would do simple ditties like that, like I just read. But he would also do stylistic things, challenges here and there to himself, that I think sometimes paid off. I don't know. I'll show you the poem when I'm done reading it so that you know what I'm talking about. This is called The White Island, or The Place of the Blessed. In this world, the Isle of Dreams, while we sit by sorrow's streams, tears and terrors are our themes, reciting. But when once from hence we fly, more and more approaching nigh unto young eternity, uniting. In that whiter island, where things are evermore sincere, candor here and luster there, delighting. There no monstrous fancy shall out of hell an horror call, to create or cause at all affrighting. There in calm and cooling sleep, we our eyes shall never steep, but eternal watch shall keep, attending. Pleasures such as shall pursue me immortalized, and you, the fresh joys as never two have ending. And you can tell even from my reading there what you're going to see when I show it to you, which is that every one of those stanzas ends in a single word, and the punctuation changes. It goes from colons moving the action on to periods, and all of those final concluding words rhyme, except for the last one, which brings an ending to the poem. Of course, it's about the kind of thing that Herrick dreamed about, an afterlife in which there was no pain, in which there was only joy, in which you weren't miserable all the time. Needless to say, he did not get that afterlife. And and the reason he didn't get that afterlife is not because he was a wicked person. It's because no one gets that afterlife. You're an organic being. You, of course, don't get that afterlife. There's no part of you that's not organic. There's no part of you that's all poised and ready to do interdimensional travel. He didn't get that afterlife because nobody gets that afterlife. And again, I want to point out, it's perfectly okay with me if you believe that, but look at what it cost him to believe that. Imagine how different he would have been if he had concentrated on the here and now. Maybe you'll say, maybe your heart is warmer than mine, and you'll say he needed that to get through his days. He needed that hope, that illusion, that someday he would be free of pain and discomfort. Someday he would be reunited with all dead people that he had loved. And that hope got him through his day, and without it, his life would have been bleaker. Okay. All right. Well, we can have that conversation over wine and calzones when you come to Hyde Cottage as to which of those is preferable. I myself wonder what his body of work would have been like, and also his life would have been like, if he hadn't had that hope, that if he hadn't had that holding out all this time. Certainly, uh, a lot of his poetry would either be gone or would be very different. So there's at least that to say. But that's our poem for today. It was a stylistic exercise for Herrick, but also an interesting one. It's beautiful. Obviously, it's beautifully done. Uh, and I'm going to use this as a kind of benchmarker for myself, never to miss Poetry Thursday again. I'm going to try never to miss Poetry Thursday again. After all, we've got Aaron Facer out there all alone reading poetry that nobody cares about. Actually, there are a couple of other people who read poems on Thursdays, and I want to join their ranks, so I want to continue. I will mark this. I will hashtag it. And I guess since I've mentioned him a few times, I'll link to Aaron Facer just so you know, our one lone Poetry Thursday warrior. You can go and watch him because I'm sure he's done a poem today. I haven't actually looked at BookTube today. But anyway, that's Poetry Thursday for today. Who knows where I'll be next Poetry Thursday, but I will read a poem if I have to. If I don't have any access to books, I'll read you one from memory. But I will see you then. Thank you, BookTube.